Washington woke up changed. The sabotage is over. Today, December 14th, 2025, the United States of America officially exited a state of managerial coma. At 12:14 post-Meridiem Eastern Time, the United States Congress did what the heartland has been waiting for decades. It handed the steering wheel back to the captain. The passage of the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2026 was not merely a budgetary procedure. It was an act of unconditional victory for common sense over bureaucratic chaos. Donald Trump has finally secured the tools necessary to execute the mandate given to him by the people without looking back at the endless sticks thrown in his spokes. Let us dismantle the mechanics of this brilliant political operation, which will undoubtedly enter history books as the textbook example of restoring presidential authority. For too long, America suffered from a crippling paradox. The people elected a president, but the country was run by a caste of unelected, unfireable officials. They blocked executive orders, delayed decisions, and actively sabotaged the will of the voters. Today, that era has ended. The Republican majority in Congress, realizing the criticality of the moment, has codified the executive orders of President Trump, turning them into federal law. The first and most critical element of this reform is the legislative cementing of Schedule F. The liberal media is screaming about purges, but insiders in Washington call it the Great Sanitation. 50,000 federal employees, the very people in gray suits who have stalled every change in the State Department, the Department of Justice, and the intelligence community for years, have now lost their civil service immunity. They are reclassified as political appointees. What does this mean for the average American taxpayer? It means that if the president orders the border closed, a mid-level bureaucrat in the Immigration Service can no longer find legal loopholes to disobey. He either executes the order of the elected leader, or he clears his desk for someone who is ready to work. This is the end of the era of sabotage. The state apparatus is once again becoming an instrument in the hands of the people, rather than a thing in itself. In the corridors of Washington, there is no panic, but there is a new electric tension of work. The era of endless coffee breaks and interagency intrigue is over. The era of efficiency has begun. The second key moment is the restoration of order on the streets. The legislative package includes a provision clarifying the authority of the president regarding the deployment of the National Guard. Critics call this militarization, but proponents of law and order see it as salvation. Now, if a governor of any state refuses to fight crime for political reasons, allowing cities to burn in riots or drown in fentanyl, the president has the legal right to intervene. The federal center will no longer passively watch the disintegration of the country. Trump has secured the right to act over the heads of incompetent local authorities to protect the lives and property of citizens. This is a return to the most basic function of the state, which is ensuring security. But the most grandiose victory for common sense is being forged right now across the street, in the Supreme Court building. The hearings on the case of Trump versus Slaughter have demonstrated that the highest judicial body is ready to restore the true constitutional meaning of executive power. The theory of the unitary executive championed by White House legal counsel is simple and logical. The country must have one boss. The Constitution vests executive power in the president, not in hundreds of fractured, unaccountable agencies. If the court rules in favor of Trump, and every signal indicates this is imminent, the so-called fourth branch of government will be liquidated. We are talking about the full accountability of independent regulators, including the Federal Reserve System. For decades, the Fed played its own game, often to the detriment of the real economy, hiding behind the shield of independence. Now, that shop is closing. The president, who answers to the voters for the state of the economy, will finally obtain leverage over monetary policy. This opens the road to a coordinated and powerful economic strategy. Trump will be able to synchronize tax policy with the actions of the Federal Reserve. If the country needs a cheaper dollar for exports and low rates for industrial growth, the sabotage of bankers will no longer be an obstacle. Wall Street is already reacting to this with cautious optimism. Business understands that a single center of decision-making is far better than a hydra with many heads pulling in different directions. The dollar is becoming an instrument of national power, not a plaything for globalists. Parallel to this, the House of Representatives is advancing Bill H.R. 1180, which repeals the outdated Impoundment Control Act of 1974. This returns to the president the right of impoundment, the ability to block wasteful spending. This is a direct strike against the Washington swamp. No more lobbyist pet projects sewn into the budget under the guise of aid. If Congress allocates billions for dubious green programs or gender studies in Pakistan, Trump can simply freeze those funds. It is an instrument of fiscal responsibility that America has lacked for half a century. The power of the purse remains with Congress, but the president gains a veto power over stupidity. This will save taxpayers trillions of dollars. We are witnessing the birth of a new, hyper-effective model of governance. America is returning to the design intended by the Founding Fathers, a strong presidential republic where the leader has the authority to act decisively. The system of checks and balances has not gone anywhere. The courts are working, Congress writes laws. But the element of paralysis has been removed. Trump has dismantled the mechanism that allowed the bureaucracy to rule the country instead of the president. The geopolitical effect of these changes is hard to overestimate. The world respects only strength. Moscow and Beijing see that there is no longer confusion and vacillation in Washington. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping understand that they are now dealing with a leader whose word is law. If Trump says America will make move X, he no longer needs 6 months to clear it with committees. This makes American diplomacy swift and dangerous for enemies. Allies in Europe might be shocked, but they finally see a master in the House. This is the end of the era of American weakness and indecision. Of course, the liberal press is in hysterics. They call it a dictatorship because they are losing their feeding troughs and their influence. But for the ordinary citizen living in Ohio or Texas, these news stories sound like music. They voted for a strong leader who would clean up the mess. And today, Washington has finally given him the tools to do the job. Trump is becoming the most influential president in modern history, not for the sake of power itself, but for the sake of results. He has received a mandate to fix the broken mechanism of the state. And he has started this repair by throwing out the spare parts and greasing the gears. America enters the year 2026, not as a senile giant tangled in its own red tape, but as a lean, muscular athlete ready for the race. The vertical of power is restored. Responsibility is personalized. Donald Trump does not just occupy the office now, he actually runs the United States. And judging by the reaction of the markets and the panic of America's enemies, this is exactly what the country needed to become great again. The era of excuses is over. The era of action has begun.